Hello, everybody, and good morning. My name's Don Arleth, and you're watching World News here on TVP World. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says he is waiting for a report on crucial negotiations held in Miami. Sunday's talks in Florida marked the latest round of U.S., Russian, and Ukrainian negotiations on a 20-point peace plan proposed by President Donald Trump to end the nearly 4-year war.
Europe has taken a positive decision. Ukraine will receive at least €45 billion annually over the next 2 years, and these funds can be repaid only from Russian funds. Russia must pay for its war. The €90 billion is a very real financial security guarantee for everyone in Ukraine. I thank the leaders of Europe, Antonio Costa, Ursula von der Leyen, and all national leaders who supported us. Thank you all. Glory to Ukraine.
France has welcomed Russian President Vladimir Putin's willingness to speak with President Emmanuel Macron over the war in Ukraine. This follows Macron's statement on Friday in which he said Europe needs to re-engage in direct talks with Putin if the latest U.S.-led efforts to broker a Ukraine peace deal flounder. TVP World asked Yulia Osmolovska, the director at Globsec Kyiv, whether President Macron is the right person to go one-on-one with the Russian leader.
I think that the role of President Macron here could be as an icebreaker, if you wish, because we've seen for the last couple of years a total isolation or the lack of dialogue, which was justified actually and still is justified. But because this isolation had been broken by the different approach from the US side, so I think it's reasonable enough to adjust the tactics right now. And yes, Macron could be just the first leader to contact Russia, and then the appropriate formats, as you mentioned, there could be different formats of these leading countries that show themselves. Or, for instance, the one that issued this joint declaration on Monday, and Poland included, would be a very group to communicate with Russia. But again, we have to be very, very careful in order not to send to Russia the wrong signals that Europe's are seeking this dialogue with Russia. So Russia would interpret this as they're having the upper hand of the situation, which is not the case. As I mentioned before, Europe has to clearly state and show to Russia that it has the leverage in these negotiations and it has the legitimate role to play here.
On Sunday, U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham urged the White House to send Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine if Putin rejects a settlement, and called on Donald Trump to back his secondary tariffs bill targeting nations like China that buy Russian oil. As stated by the Pentagon, American stockpiles of Tomahawk cruise missiles are large enough to supply Ukraine should a decision be made to transfer the weapons to Kyiv. With a range of 2,500 kilometers, the cruise missiles would allow Ukraine to hit military assets deep inside of Russian territory. Graham added that Russia should be designated a state sponsor of terrorism for kidnapping 20,000 Ukrainian children. In an interview, the U.S. Senator also argued that the ongoing diplomatic efforts risk allowing Moscow to make territorial gains under the guise of negotiations. According to Lindsey Graham, Vladimir Putin will continue to take the Donbass region by force unless the U.S. increases pressure on the Kremlin. China will pressure its junior partner, Russia, to keep us busy here in Europe should it attack Taiwan, says NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. In an interview with the German outlet Bild, Rutte argued that Europe must continue strengthening its defense capability to ensure its own security.
Rutte spoke at length about the need to increase defense spending and boost production, adding that Germany is currently leading the way with its recent defense spending commitments. The NATO Secretary General stressed that any ceasefire or peace agreement must ensure that Ukraine will not be attacked in the future, adding that U.S. President Trump is absolutely committed to ending the conflict. He was also adamant that the U.S. remains a friend to Europe and will remain committed to NATO as long as its member states pledge to increase defense spending.
Moscow is renewing investment in its main directorate of deep-sea research, also known as GUGI, a top-secret naval agency operating deep diving submarines for intelligence gathering and sabotage. General Sir Gwen Jenkins, the head of the UK's Royal Navy, warns that the agency's advanced underwater capabilities pose a threat to NATO's seabed infrastructure. The unit of expert submariners is responsible for mapping and potentially disrupting seabed infrastructure such as internet cables and gas pipelines, on which Britain and its NATO allies rely for communications and power supplies. According to Jenkins, Googie appears to have restarted its program after it had suffered a major setback in 2019 when 14 of its senior officers were killed in a fire on board one of its deep-diving submarines in Arctic waters off the coast of Norway. Now the agency is once again growing its underwater capabilities. Jenkins warns that it might undertake physical action to damage seabed cables and pipes. Googie's increasingly provocative behavior prompted a rare public rebuke from the UK last month after one of its vessels shone lasers at RAF aircraft while approaching British waters near Shetland. Thousands of protesters have again taken to the streets in Serbia, this time over what they're calling government pressure on state universities. The country's student-led demonstrations first picked up headlines after the collapse of a railway station canopy, which killed 16 people last year in the city of Novi Sad.
Demonstrators from all across Serbia flocked to Novi Pazar, rallying against what they describe as government pressure on state universities. More than 200 students from Novi Pazar University have lost their student status, and 30 faculty members have been expelled for their participation in nationwide protests following the Novi Sad canopy collapse, which killed 16 people.
Today we're here to send a message to Serbia that we fight for forced administration at the university and for the survival of our university. This is an issue concerning all of us, not just Novi Pazar. We will continue our fight until our forced administration is implemented, until we gain normal conditions for studying at our university and are guaranteed the possibility of normal learning.
Students from Novi Pazar have become famous countrywide after walking for days to join mass protests in Novi Sad to mark the first anniversary of the roof collapse on November 1st. Now they fear that the repressions they faced could become the government's new tactic for dealing with protesters.
Such case as we now observe with Novi Pazar University can be used also against other universities across the country, and students actually want to stop this practice and ensure free access of students to education and basically free right of professors to work at the university and have own opinion.
A year on, the protests continue to grow, despite the government's heavy-handed response. Led by students, academics and opposition figures, the protest movement accuses Serbian President Aleksandar Vučić and his populist nationalist party of fostering corruption, poor public services, nepotism and restrictions on the media's freedom of speech. For TVP World, Gabriela Fesnak.
Swedish authorities detained a sanctioned Russian vessel after an onboard inspection on Sunday. The ship cannot proceed without approval from the prosecutor, according to the press secretary of Swedish Customs. The freighter Adler suffered an engine failure and dropped anchor off Sweden's west coast on December 20th. Swedish Customs and Coast Guard then boarded the vessel and carried out an inspection. The case has now been forwarded to the prosecutors at Sweden's National Unit for International Organized Crime. The Adler had previously been used to transport Russian weapons. The owner of the vessel is sanctioned both by the European Union and the United States for carrying North Korean ammunition to be used by Russia on the front lines of Ukraine. Now back to Ukraine, where relentless Russian attacks are forcing the country to mobilize every possible resource. Men beyond the usual combat age remain on the front lines, while teenagers are stepping up to lead resistance fighters in Zaporizhia. Alexandra Bulenda reports.
At first glance, this could be any military unit anywhere in the world. Men in camouflage, weapons being checked, orders exchanged quietly. They are older than Ukraine's legal limit on combat age, but these men are not soldiers, at least not officially, and yet they have chosen to stay and fight. This is Did. His call sign means grandpa.
I left to fight in May 2014. I came back after I was badly wounded. I was lucky, you can see, I still have both legs. They wanted to amputate both. I ended up in Estonia. I had many surgeries there.
Today his vineyard lies under Russian occupation. His home was destroyed. Too old to return to combat legally, Did formed a volunteer unit, the Steppe Wolves. Their mission is one forbidden to regular soldiers. The Steppe Wolves retrieve unexploded Ukrainian rockets from the battlefield, weapons considered too dangerous to touch and repair. Some have military experience, others do not. What unites them is their refusal to be sidelined.
Soldiers tell us there is something there, knowing we will pick it up and repair it. So then we go and retrieve it.
Resistance in Ukraine does not always wear an official uniform. Sometimes resistance begins in the classroom. This is Igor. When Russia occupied parts of the Zaporizhia region, he was just 16. Within weeks, he organized a group of teenagers, boys aged 14 to 18. They called themselves Puhachi, the Owls. They tore down Russian flags, burned them, filmed it, and posted online.
I saw with my own eyes and experienced things no one should ever have to see or experience.
Local collaborators betrayed them. Igor and his friends were arrested and accused of terrorism.
I was in the 9th grade when the war came. I realized that the Russians were here. I could see my enemy and could start taking action.
They passed on intelligence, locations of Russian troops and artillery.
This video went viral. We also passed locations where Russian troops and artillery were concentrated.
The interrogations were brutal.
They started electrocuting me. They only stopped because I was already losing consciousness.
Today, Igor is 19. He studies construction works and lives in Kyiv. He says he has never regretted resisting occupation. Kyiv itself carries many scars of resistance. In 2025, Russian drones and ballistic missiles regularly targeted Ukraine's energy system. Power stations are hit again and again. Inside one of them, workers salvage what they can from shattered equipment.
Right now we are taking apart everything we have left and are trying to put together a few functioning power units.
Despite the strikes, they return to work.
Somehow our workers still manage to do their jobs.
When the power goes out after shelling, we understand the situation and wait.
Phones are charged whenever electricity can be found.
Here I know you can always come and recharge.
From volunteer fighters and teenage partisans to engineers and civilians waiting patiently in the dark, Ukrainians find themselves fighting far beyond the front line. And for many here, resistance is no longer an act of defiance. It is simply everyday life. For TVP World, I'm Alexandra Bulenda.
Christmas is just around the corner. This can only mean one thing, that Santa Claus has once again taken off from his North Pole workshop to spread Christmas cheer and, of course, to bring presents to children all over the world. And that's all the time we have here on World News. Thanks for joining us and stay with us for more here on TVP World.